By the late 1930s, the world was teetering on the brink of a conflict unlike any before. While Europe prepared for conventional war, a parallel and more insidious race was quietly unfolding. The race to harness atomic energy for military purposes. Germany, under the leadership of the Nazi regime, had initiated secretive research programs aimed at developing nuclear weapons. The stakes were terrifyingly high. The prospect of a weapon capable of unprecedented destruction drove both fear and innovation across nations, and for the Allies, halting Hitler's progress became a critical objective. In Norway, a country rich with hydroelectric resources and relatively isolated in terms of German oversight, a small, seemingly innocuous element became vital to this race: heavy water. Heavy water, or deuterium oxide, was an essential component in nuclear reactors and could be used to produce plutonium, a key material for atomic bombs. By 1940, the Norsk hydro plant at Vemork, near Rjukan in Telemark, had become the world's primary source of heavy water. This seemingly quiet industrial facility, nestled amid Norway's fjords and mountains, would soon become the focal point of one of the most daring sabotage operations in history. The Allied intelligence community, particularly the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, had long been aware of Germany's interest in nuclear research. Reports from spies, intercepted communications, and scientific informants suggested that the Nazis were actively pursuing nuclear weapons, and that heavy water was crucial to their efforts. The Norsk hydro plant, producing this rare and vital resource, was a glaring vulnerability. If the Allies could disrupt or destroy its production, they could significantly delay Germany's nuclear ambitions, a task of immense strategic importance. The initial reconnaissance of Vemork and the surrounding areas was fraught with challenges. Norway had been occupied by German forces in April 1940, and German military presence around industrial sites was heavy. Guards patrolled the plant, bridges and roads were monitored, and the rugged terrain itself posed logistical difficulties. SOE operatives had to find ways to assess the situation without alerting the occupiers, gathering intelligence on production methods, guard routines, and vulnerabilities. This was the shadow work that would define the coming months. Careful observation, stealthy infiltration, and meticulous planning. Among the key figures in this endeavor were Norwegian resistance members trained by the British. These individuals were not just ordinary soldiers. They were skilled climbers, experts in survival in harsh alpine environments, and adept at silent movement under cover of night. Their local knowledge proved invaluable. They understood the fjords, mountains, and forests in ways that maps could never convey. For months, these operatives conducted reconnaissance, noting guard rotations, transport schedules, and the plant's layout, building a detailed understanding of the target. The stakes of failure were immense. German intelligence had proven ruthless in Norway, executing collaborators and resistance fighters alike. Any mistake could lead to capture, torture, or execution. Yet, the operatives understood that success could significantly alter the trajectory of the war. A single successful operation could buy precious months, perhaps even years, by delaying the Nazis' access to nuclear materials. This delicate balance of risk and reward framed every decision, every climb, and every observation. Allied planners faced difficult choices in determining how to strike Vemork. A conventional bombing raid was considered, but the heavy water production facilities were heavily fortified, and the surrounding terrain made precision bombing nearly impossible. Civilian areas were nearby, increasing the risk of collateral damage. Instead, the plan evolved toward a direct, covert operation. A small group of highly trained commandos infiltrating the facility, planting explosives, and escaping undetected. This approach would minimize civilian casualties while maximizing strategic impact, a hallmark of SOE operations. The psychological preparation of the operatives was as crucial as the physical training. They were briefed on the importance of heavy water to the Nazi nuclear program, emphasizing the global significance of their mission. Each operative understood that they were not merely conducting sabotage. They were striking at the heart of Hitler's most dangerous ambitions. This knowledge forged a sense of purpose and resilience that would be tested repeatedly in the harsh conditions ahead. By the end of 1942, plans had crystallized. The SOE, in collaboration with Norwegian resistance networks, had assembled a team of 6 men, each selected for their climbing ability, endurance, and ability to operate under extreme stress. The mission, codenamed Operation Gunnerside, would require the team to parachute onto Norwegian territory, navigate treacherous snow-covered terrain, evade German patrols, and infiltrate the Vemork plant. The margin for error was non-existent, and success would hinge on precision, courage, and unwavering determination. Chapter 1 sets the stage for Operation Gunnerside, highlighting the global stakes, the strategic importance of heavy water, and the meticulous preparation of the Norwegian operatives. It establishes the tension and urgency of the mission, illustrating how the combination of intelligence, skill, and daring could influence the outcome of the war. The story of one small group of men, operating in the shadows of occupied Norway, would soon demonstrate that the most profound impacts often come from the most unexpected places. The night they parachuted into Norway was a night that erased the world above it. January wind shrieked through the tree line. Snow lay in a white hush across ridges and ravines, reflecting faint starlight like a pale, indifferent mirror. For the 6 men of the Gunnerside team, Norwegian patriots trained by the British SOE, the drop zone was less an arrival than a baptism. They had left one life and entered another, a life where each step might be their last and each heartbeat might be recorded in enemy files. Their insertion was surgical. Transported from Britain in RAF aircraft, they had been bundled like shadows into the dark belly of a plane and flown across the North Sea. The air smelled of oil and anticipation. Later, when the stream of parachutes opened like a constellation against the Norwegian sky, the men felt a cold clarity. They were no longer planning. They were acting. Landing with flimsy silk chutes into near sub-zero temperatures, they wasted no time. Snow swallowed their prints. Silent and efficient, they gathered gear, checked weapons, and moved. The first challenge was survival. The mountains around Rjukan are beautiful in daylight and merciless by night. The men had to reach a safe house, a hut maintained by local resistance, while avoiding German patrols and observation posts. They navigated by compass, by the geometry of the stars, and by the careful intelligence of Norwegian guides. Each risk was catalogued. Where sentries were known to walk, which roads were monitored, where the river ice might conceal a patrol boat. The countryside offered both concealment and peril. Avalanches, exposure, and the threat of betrayal were constant companions. At the safe house, they met with the core local network. Farmers, railway workers, and ski instructors who had volunteered not because they loved risk, but because they loved freedom more. These locals provided crucial updates. Guard rotations, guard counts, shifts in plant security, and the shifting routines of German engineers repairing heavy water equipment. The Gunnerside men learned quickly that their mission would not be an assault in broad daylight. It would be a surgical intrusion into the heart of a guarded industrial complex. Training in Britain had prepared them in technique, explosive placement, silent movement, and the art of climbing under load. But training could not fully mimic the Norwegian cold that numbed fingers and turned breath into white ghosts. The men rehearsed entry routes in imitation, threading lines between rocky outcrops, hauling equipment up gullies and avoiding the glare of searchlights. Timing was everything. A misstep, a boot in fresh powder, a snapped twig, could alert an entire garrison. They practiced communicating by signals so minute a snowflake could hide them, learning to read the night like an open book. Their plan was audacious in its simplicity. The Vemork plant sat high above the Rjukan Valley, wedged against a waterfall, protected by barracks and guarded gates. Heavy water production was housed in a specific wing of the facility, accessible by a service road and an internal network of corridors. The team would infiltrate on foot from the brittle, icy rim above the plant, find a way through the security perimeter, and demolish the electrolysis cells and associated equipment with time charges. Then, if possible, they would slip away into the mountains before dawn, melting into the Norwegian winter like ghosts. On the night of the operation itself, they moved like a single organism. Each man had a role defined to the millimeter: recon, demolition, lookout, and extraction. They approached beneath the cold canopy of firs, using climbing ropes to descend a slope that none but local climbers would dream of navigating. At moments, the wire felt like a lifeline, At others, it felt like a sentence. Wind tore at the rope, glaciers loomed, every breath fogged in their helmets. They reached the plant's upper perimeter with a breathless mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The first obstacle was the guard barracks. 2 sentries paced a path, their breath clouded in the air as they smoked, clicking in and out of the plant's shadows. The gunnerside men found a narrow cliff face that allowed them to bypass the main gates, letting them slip beneath the radar of patrols. They had to move within earshot of sleeping men and still not make a sound loud enough to wake a single sentry. Inside, the plant's corridors smelled faintly of machinery and metal, a sterile scent that felt obscene against the raw outside cold. Heavy water cells, massive, humming apparatus behind thick doors, required specific placement of explosives to ensure not only physical destruction but also the disruption of production capability. They worked quickly in low light. A cut here, a fuse there. The charges were set to detonate hours later, after the team had fled to safety. Each explosive had been measured and calibrated by technicians before the mission, measured in kilograms and in desperate hopes. Even the best-laid plans met resistance. A Norwegian collaborator had reported a shift change that unexpectedly left a patrol in an alternate corridor. For a heartbeat, time froze. A sentry crossed the path the lookout had chosen. The men held their breath. In the hush, the sentry's boots passed. The team melted into shadow. The operation depended on such seconds. Rigid control of fear and the cold discipline of hiding in the teeth of danger. Then came the moment of escape. With charges set, the team retreated up the frail spine of the mountain, slipping between rocks and clouds. Timers ticked in their minds as they carved fresh tracks into the snow that would later be attributed to foxes and avalanches. They reached a rendezvous point where local resistance met them, providing blankets, rations, and false identities. Exhaustion and the cold demanded sleep, but there was little rest. They waited for the detonation reports from distant radio checks, calls that would come in whispers between safe houses. When the explosions finally echoed through the valley, the night itself seemed to vibrate. Doors burst. Alarms rang. German searchlights stitched the sky with angry needles. The plant's vital electrolysis cells were smoking ruins. Inside German command centers, confusion spread like oil. The damage was precise, surgical. The core production capability was shattered, and the heavy water output halted. The consequences would ripple far beyond the valley walls. Operation Gunnerside's immediate success lay not only in explosives and bravery, but in a profound synergy of local knowledge and covert mastery. The Norwegians had shown that a small, well-prepared group, moving with calculation and courage, could strike a blow that would echo into laboratories in Germany and briefing rooms in London. Their frozen footsteps, erased by drifting snow, left an indelible mark on the trajectory of the atomic race. The morning after the sabotage, the atmosphere around the Vemork plant shifted from routine efficiency to chaotic alarm. Alarms blared, and searchlights cut across the snow-covered landscape like blades. German officers scrambled, their routines shattered by an intrusion that seemed impossible. How had a handful of Norwegians penetrated what was considered one of the most secure facilities in occupied Europe? The question dominated every command post, every officer's mind, as the reality sank in. Operation Gunnerside had succeeded in ways the Germans had not anticipated. Inside the plant, workers were confronted with twisted machinery and shattered infrastructure. The electrolysis cells, essential for separating heavy water from ordinary water, were destroyed. Production halted immediately, throwing a wrench into the plans of scientists who had been counting on a continuous supply of heavy water for nuclear experiments. Engineers tried to assess the damage, but the destruction was methodical, surgical. It was evident that the saboteurs knew exactly what they were targeting. Every piece of vital equipment was compromised, while ancillary structures remained largely intact. The German military response was swift and ruthless. Patrols intensified throughout the Telemark region, with search parties combing the snow for footprints, sled tracks, and other signs of intrusion. Snowdrifts were scoured, forests mapped, and every hut checked for the faintest hint of human presence. Yet the Gunnerside team had already melted into the mountains, leaving behind only a faint trace and a deepening panic. The terrain, which had been their ally, now frustrated their pursuers. The mountains' cliffs, frozen streams, and dense forests provided natural cover, enabling the saboteurs to evade capture despite the German sweep. The psychological impact on German personnel was profound. Officers at headquarters debated whether the attack was an inside job, a result of Norwegian sympathizers, or the work of British-trained commandos. Morale among workers and guards plummeted. The sense of invincibility they had held over the plant was gone. The Germans increased security measures, posting additional sentries, adding checkpoints, and installing watchtowers. But these measures, however extreme, could not restore confidence or compensate for the meticulousness of the saboteurs' work. Meanwhile, the Allied command monitored the unfolding situation with cautious optimism. Intelligence from Norway indicated that the operation had succeeded without any casualties among the saboteurs, and vital heavy water production was disrupted for an indeterminate period. Planners in London understood that this delay was critical. Even a few months without heavy water could significantly hinder the German nuclear program. The operation had proven that a small, highly trained, and precisely coordinated team could deliver a strategic blow far greater than its size might suggest. The ramifications extended beyond the immediate physical damage. The operation galvanized the Norwegian resistance, showing that even under occupation, effective action was possible. Local populations, previously hesitant to confront German authority, were inspired by the audacity and success of the team. Underground networks flourished as a result, enabling further intelligence gathering, sabotage, and support for Allied operations in the region. The morale boost among resistance fighters was palpable. They had witnessed a tangible demonstration of the power of coordination, courage, and precision. The scientific consequences were equally significant. German physicists who had been advancing nuclear research suddenly faced a critical bottleneck. Without heavy water, experiments slowed, timelines extended, and certain research had to be put on hold. This delay, though invisible to the wider world at the time, had strategic implications. The atomic race, which could have tipped the balance of power dramatically, was stalled in its tracks. Analysts later recognized that even a small delay in production could alter the trajectory of research and development, giving the Allies a crucial window to advance their own nuclear efforts. For the gunnerside team, the aftermath was a mixture of exhilaration and vigilance. They knew the Germans would continue to search, and that returning to the plant was impossible. Their mission had succeeded in its immediate objectives, but survival remained paramount. They navigated the harsh Norwegian winter, avoiding patrols, relying on caches of supplies hidden by resistance supporters, and moving in the shadows. Each day presented the constant risk of exposure, frostbite, or betrayal, yet each day also affirmed the strategic significance of their daring actions. The meticulous planning that had preceded the operation became a case study in covert warfare. Timing, terrain knowledge, and local support were just as critical as explosive placement and technical expertise. The gunnerside mission demonstrated that in modern warfare, information and local intelligence could be leveraged to amplify the effects of a small, highly skilled force. Unlike conventional battles, where numbers and firepower dominate, this mission highlighted the disproportionate impact that preparation, stealth, and courage could achieve. In the broader context of World War II, Operation Gunnerside emerged as a symbol of ingenuity and resistance. It illustrated the potential of coordinated sabotage to alter strategic outcomes, particularly in areas where conventional military operations were impractical or fraught with risk. The mission reinforced a lesson that would resonate throughout the war, that a well-trained, motivated, and informed team could challenge and disrupt even the most fortified objectives of a powerful adversary. Chapter 3 establishes the immediate aftermath of Operation Gunnerside, demonstrating the physical, psychological, and strategic impacts of the sabotage. It highlights how the actions of a single, small team could ripple outward, affecting German military planning, scientific research, and local resistance morale. The stage is set for subsequent efforts to capitalize on this disruption, showing that the mission's influence extended far beyond the fjords of Telemark. The Germans were not idle in the wake of the Vemork sabotage. The destruction of critical heavy water equipment had sent shockwaves through their command, but it also provoked a response. an urgent effort to fortify, secure, and maintain production under the looming threat of further Allied attacks. The Vemork plant, perched high above the Rjukan Valley, became a fortress in both structure and mindset, with layers of security that reflected the gravity of the strategic stakes. Immediately after the attack, German engineers began repairing the damage. Reinforced steel replaced twisted frames. Additional security measures were implemented to guard against a repeat infiltration. Guards were doubled, then tripled, with shifts overlapping to ensure no gap in surveillance. Watchtowers were constructed at vantage points along ridges, equipped with spotlights and signal flares. Roads leading to the plant were blocked and mined, and patrols expanded into the surrounding forests. Every approach that had allowed the gunnerside team to slip through undetected was scrutinized and fortified. Yet the measures were not merely physical. Psychological fortification was equally important. Commanders emphasized vigilance, spreading the understanding that Norwegian resistance and British-trained operatives could strike anywhere. Propaganda posters reminded workers and guards that espionage and sabotage were constant threats. Officers were briefed repeatedly, instilling a culture of hyper-awareness. Fear became an operational tool. It ensured attention to detail, but also revealed the limitations of coercive discipline. Despite these measures, the previous success of the saboteurs had left an indelible mark, proving that the plant was not invulnerable. In response to the sabotage, the Germans also accelerated alternative heavy water production plans. Additional laboratories were established in occupied territories, and scientists were instructed to stockpile existing reserves. Yet the intricacies of heavy water production meant that replication elsewhere was slow and complex. The loss at Vemork created a bottleneck that could not be resolved quickly. Each day of disrupted production bought the Allies more time and placed pressure on the German nuclear effort. It became evident that sabotage could achieve strategic impact disproportionate to the size of the attacking force. The Norwegian resistance, emboldened by gunnerside's success, also adapted. They recognized that the Germans would be vigilant, that patrols would be frequent, and that traps could be set. Subsequent operations required even greater caution, more elaborate planning, and precise coordination with local informants. Skiing guides, farmers, and other clandestine operatives became essential to maintaining situational awareness. Supply caches were hidden deeper into the mountains, communication networks encrypted with codes, and escape routes rehearsed and diversified. The environment itself became both a tool and a challenge. Snow and ice offered concealment but exacted physical tolls on operatives. British intelligence carefully monitored the German response. SOE agents debriefed operatives returning from Norway, evaluated patrol patterns, and adjusted plans for further actions. Reports detailed guard routines, reinforcement deployments, and repairs to damaged infrastructure. These observations informed both immediate tactical decisions and longer-term strategic planning. The Allies understood that the Vemork operation had disrupted not only production but the psychological equilibrium of the Germans. Maintaining pressure through intelligence and minor sabotage missions became a priority. One notable aspect of the German reaction was the increasing reliance on secrecy and compartmentalization. Only essential personnel were allowed near sensitive areas. Knowledge of the production process was distributed on a need-to-know basis. Laboratories, storage facilities, and engineering workshops were isolated from one another. Workers underwent interrogations and loyalty assessments. Despite these measures, the earlier sabotage had demonstrated the vulnerability inherent in any system dependent on concentrated resources. No amount of fortification could fully compensate for the knowledge that a small, determined group could bypass physical defenses. The strategic consequences of this escalation were profound. The Germans had to allocate personnel, resources, and energy to the defense of Vemork and associated facilities. Troops that could have been deployed elsewhere, equipment that could have supported other projects, and scientific expertise were redirected to mitigate risk. In effect, a tiny team of saboteurs forced a redistribution of resources on a scale far beyond their numbers, illustrating the principle that strategic disruption is not measured solely by destruction but by the reallocation and distraction it forces upon an opponent. For the Norwegian operatives, Understanding the German fortifications became essential for future missions. They mapped patrol patterns, observed new watchtower placements, and recorded the timing of guard rotations. These observations would inform not only further sabotage efforts but also escape and survival strategies. The mountains and valleys, once simply a backdrop to their operation, had transformed into a complex chessboard, where each movement could determine success or failure, life or death. Chapter 4 demonstrates how the Germans responded to the Vemork sabotage, both physically and psychologically. It highlights the interplay between defense, intelligence, and morale in wartime operations. While the Allies had achieved a remarkable tactical success, the German response underscored the dynamic nature of warfare. Success often provokes countermeasures, requiring continued adaptation, intelligence, and ingenuity. The story of Operation Gunnerside illustrates that even the most fortified positions can be vulnerable, and that small, calculated actions can shape the broader strategic landscape. The destruction at Vemork sent tremors through Germany's scientific community. Within weeks, physicists, engineers, and technicians were convening in Berlin and occupied territories to assess the implications. The heavy water plant had been central to experimental nuclear reactor designs, and the sudden halt in production was catastrophic. Germany's atomic program, already in its early and fragile stages, faced an unforeseen setback, forcing scientists to reassess priorities, timelines, and research methods. At the core of this program were laboratories experimenting with uranium and heavy water reactors. Plans for plutonium production were carefully guarded, and progress had been painstakingly slow. Yet the sabotage illustrated a harsh truth. Security could not be assumed. The loss of Vemork's output meant that experiments relying on heavy water had to be postponed, and existing supplies were rationed and diverted to critical research facilities. Each day of lost production represented a potential delay in the creation of a nuclear device, providing the Allies with crucial breathing space. In response, the Germans sought to decentralize their operations. Smaller production facilities were identified, but none had the efficiency or scale of Vemork. Attempts to reproduce the electrolysis process in laboratories elsewhere proved time-consuming and prone to error. Engineers worked tirelessly, aware that any misstep could result in additional delays or dangerous accidents. The heavy water shortage forced scientists to innovate within extreme constraints, demonstrating both the vulnerability and resilience of the German scientific enterprise. Allied intelligence closely monitored these developments. Reports from agents and informants indicated that the Germans were struggling to adapt. The SOE, in consultation with physicists and strategic planners in Britain, realized the operation had more than immediate tactical significance. It had created a long-term strategic advantage. The delay in the German nuclear program reduced the likelihood that Hitler could deploy atomic weapons before the end of the war. This knowledge strengthened Allied resolve, proving that carefully executed sabotage could alter the course of a global conflict. For the Norwegian resistance, the success at Vemork became a case study in effective covert operations. Lessons were drawn about planning, timing, and collaboration with local populations. Subsequent missions were inspired by the audacity and precision of the Gunnerside team. While the harsh Norwegian winter, treacherous terrain, and enemy patrols remained formidable obstacles, the morale boost from their prior success encouraged more coordinated efforts against German infrastructure and supply lines. One particularly challenging consequence of the sabotage was German efforts to track the Gunnerside operatives. The increased security measures, patrols, and checkpoints meant that future incursions into the plant were far riskier. Yet, the Allies understood that the element of surprise remained their greatest asset. New intelligence-gathering missions were meticulously planned, often involving months of observation before a single step toward action was taken. The interplay of patience, observation, and timing became the hallmark of resistance strategy. Meanwhile, the broader strategic implications began to emerge. Heavy water was not just a scientific curiosity. It was a linchpin in the atomic race. By slowing Germany's progress, the Allies gained an indirect but tangible advantage. It provided more time to advance their own nuclear research, notably the Manhattan Project, where parallel efforts in the United States and Britain were accelerating. Each delay in German production shifted the balance slightly, a subtle but critical influence on the eventual outcome of the war. The psychological dimension of the operation should not be underestimated. German scientists and military planners faced an uncomfortable realization. Even in a heavily occupied territory, their most vital resources were vulnerable. This fostered a pervasive sense of insecurity, complicating research and strategic planning. When engineers had to spend more time guarding facilities than refining processes, efficiency declined. The saboteurs, operating unseen and unacknowledged, had exerted influence far beyond the immediate explosion of charges. The narrative of Operation Gunnerside also reverberated internationally. Allied propaganda highlighted the daring and ingenuity of the Norwegian operatives, bolstering morale on the home front and among resistance movements in occupied Europe. The story of a small, courageous team capable of crippling a key component of Hitler's nuclear ambitions became a symbol of hope. It demonstrated that meticulous planning, local knowledge, and courage could produce results disproportionate to size and resources. By mid-1943, the German nuclear program had partially recovered, but the setback at Vemork had irrevocably altered its trajectory. Analysts later concluded that, without this sabotage, Germany might have had a functional heavy water supply several months earlier, potentially allowing accelerated development of nuclear reactors and materials. The operation, therefore, was not merely a tactical success. It was a strategic intervention with far-reaching consequences, affecting both the immediate conflict and the broader post-war scientific landscape. Chapter 5 demonstrates the cascading effects of Operation Gunnerside on Germany's nuclear program, resistance morale, and Allied strategic planning. It emphasizes the interplay of sabotage, intelligence, and global wartime strategy, showing that the actions of a small team in the Norwegian mountains could resonate across continents and alter the pace of scientific and military developments. The echoes of the mission extended far beyond the fjords of Telemark, shaping the war in ways both immediate and enduring. Following the catastrophic loss at Vemork, the Germans were determined to reclaim control and secure their nuclear ambitions. They initiated a series of measures aimed at preventing future sabotage, escalating both security and operational discipline at heavy water facilities. The once isolated plant in the Norwegian mountains transformed into a tightly guarded fortress, a symbol of the Nazis' desperation to maintain their atomic program against the relentless ingenuity of the Allies. The first step in the German counterstrike was fortification. Engineers reinforced walls, installed anti-intrusion mechanisms, and implemented sophisticated alarm systems. Guard rotations were increased, with heavily armed personnel patrolling not only the perimeter but also the surrounding valleys and mountain passes. Each patrol was calculated for maximum coverage, yet the rugged Norwegian terrain rendered even the most rigorous plans imperfect. The Gunnerside team had demonstrated that stealth, knowledge of the environment, and precise timing could overcome raw strength in numbers, a lesson that the Germans were forced to internalize. In addition to physical defenses, German command sought to employ psychological tactics. Workers and soldiers were reminded that any failure could have dire consequences. Propaganda emphasized loyalty, vigilance, and fear of betrayal. Officers conducted frequent inspections, interviews, and interrogations to root out sympathizers or informants who might assist resistance efforts. The pervasive sense of scrutiny weighed heavily on personnel, and although these measures were intended to secure the plant, they also introduced inefficiency and tension within the workforce. The Germans also attempted to accelerate alternative heavy water production. Small laboratories were established in Germany and other occupied territories, but none matched the scale and efficiency of Vemork. The process of electrolysis, complex and delicate, could not be easily replicated without significant trial and error. Each misstep cost valuable time and delayed the progression of the nuclear program. These efforts, while well-intentioned, were further hindered by the shortage of experienced engineers and the constant threat of Allied reconnaissance and sabotage. In response, the Allies intensified intelligence operations. Norwegian resistance networks provided continuous updates on patrol patterns, guard counts, and structural reinforcements. British intelligence coordinated with local operatives, analyzing data and developing contingency plans for further incursions. Each piece of information became critical in assessing the feasibility of subsequent operations. The balance between risk and reward dictated strategy. While a second infiltration could inflict further disruption, the margin for error had narrowed considerably due to heightened German vigilance. The gunnerside team, although already celebrated for their previous success, continued to operate under extreme caution. They adapted to increased security measures, moving at night, using alternate routes, and relying on hidden caches of supplies maintained by the resistance. Every mission demanded meticulous preparation, with escape and survival strategies rehearsed in unforgiving conditions. The mountains that had once provided cover now became a maze of potential traps and observation points, requiring the operatives to rely on intuition, endurance, and local knowledge to navigate safely. The strategic importance of heavy water remained high on the German agenda. Physicists and engineers were under tremendous pressure to restore production while maintaining secrecy. They faced logistical challenges, such as transporting damaged equipment for repair and ensuring consistent supply lines amidst Allied surveillance. The sabotage had revealed vulnerabilities not only in the physical infrastructure but also in the operational procedures and contingency planning of the Nazi nuclear program. These weaknesses forced the Germans to rethink resource allocation and operational priorities. The psychological impact on the Germans extended beyond Wehrmacht. News of the sabotage spread through German military and scientific communities, highlighting the effectiveness of Allied operations in occupied territories. The realization that small, determined teams could penetrate supposedly secure installations caused unease and demanded increased defensive expenditures. This diversion of resources had broader strategic implications, as troops, equipment, and energy were diverted from other theaters of the war to protect critical sites in Norway. Allied planners recognized the opportunity embedded within this disruption. By maintaining pressure on the Germans and supporting resistance networks, they could continuously delay the Nazi nuclear program. Each delay represented not merely a tactical victory but a strategic advantage in the global war effort. The gunnerside operation had proven the effectiveness of coordinated sabotage, and its principles, local knowledge, stealth, intelligence, and precision, became a template for subsequent missions. In the months following the initial operation, the Germans attempted additional security trials, including simulated attacks to test guard responses, relocation of sensitive materials, and the installation of new detection equipment. While these measures increased protection, they also confirmed one enduring truth. A determined, well-prepared team could still exploit gaps in even the most fortified defenses. The Nazis had been forced into a reactive posture, always calculating for an unpredictable enemy operating in harsh and unforgiving terrain. Chapter 6 explores the German countermeasures after Operation Gunnerside, demonstrating the interplay between defense, psychology, and strategy. It shows how the saboteurs' actions forced the enemy into a reactive stance, consuming resources, attention, and manpower. This chapter emphasizes that even a single successful operation can ripple through an opponent's operational planning, affecting production, morale, and long-term strategic objectives. The stage is set for further Allied missions and continued disruption, highlighting the enduring impact of a small group of courageous individuals operating in the shadows of occupied Norway. By early 1943, the Wehrmacht plant had partially recovered from the gunnerside operation, but the Allies knew that temporary repairs were insufficient to secure the Nazi atomic program. Heavy water production remained critical, and the window of opportunity for Germany to advance nuclear research was narrow. In response, British intelligence and the Norwegian resistance began planning a follow-up operation, one designed to strike decisively and prevent any sustained recovery. This marked the second phase of the audacious campaign against the Nazi nuclear ambitions. The planning for the follow-up operation was meticulous. Allied operatives studied maps, patrol routines, and environmental conditions with unprecedented precision. Winter had taken its toll on the terrain, creating both obstacles and advantages. Snowfields, frozen rivers, and steep cliffs offered concealment for skilled mountaineers, but posed immense risks for exposure, frostbite, and injury. Resistance networks coordinated supply drops, ensuring that the operatives would have food, clothing, explosives, and radios for communication. Every step was calculated to maximize success while minimizing risk. The second operation was not merely a repeat of Gunnerside. Intelligence reports indicated that German security measures had been significantly enhanced. Guards were more vigilant, routes were monitored, and the plant itself had been reinforced. The Allies had to adapt their strategy, emphasizing stealth, timing, and psychological deception. Diversionary tactics were employed. Fake radio transmissions, misleading supply movements, and decoy personnel were used to distract German forces from the real targets. This layered approach required precise coordination and communication, with no room for error. On the night of the operation, the Norwegian operatives moved under a moonless sky. The terrain demanded extraordinary skill. Crevasses, ice-covered slopes, and jagged cliffs required climbers to navigate with care and speed. Each team member carried explosives, tools, and personal weapons, their packs weighted yet essential. They communicated through subtle signals, hand gestures, and whispered commands, ensuring that German patrols would remain unaware of their presence. Silence was paramount. The slightest misstep could trigger an alarm and compromise the mission. Approaching the plant, the operatives observed the enhanced fortifications, reinforced gates, additional sentries, and spotlights scanning the valley below. Yet, through local intelligence and careful observation, they identified weaknesses. Certain guard rotations allowed narrow windows of undetected movement. Hidden paths in the mountain, previously unknown to the Germans, provided access to service corridors and less defended sections of the plant. These observations allowed the operatives to infiltrate with a combination of stealth and confidence, bypassing the most visible defenses. Inside the plant, the team faced new challenges. Repair crews had restored some electrolysis cells, and additional storage areas had been constructed to safeguard heavy water. The operatives worked systematically, identifying the most critical points for destruction. Explosives were placed with surgical precision, timed to detonate after the team had safely retreated. The tension was immense. Every second counted, and the knowledge that failure would mean capture or death weighed heavily on each operative. Yet their training, discipline, and determination prevailed. The retreat from the plant was as dangerous as the infiltration. German patrols had increased, and the environment was unforgiving. Freezing temperatures, deep snow, and narrow escape routes required the operatives to maintain peak physical and mental performance. They used knowledge of the terrain, pre-planned escape routes, and the cover of darkness to evade capture. Every crevice, tree, and snowdrift became both a hiding place and a potential hazard. Their survival depended on skill, experience, and an unwavering focus on the mission. When the explosives detonated, the plant was once again crippled. The destruction was more extensive than the initial operation, targeting both existing equipment and newly repaired facilities. The Germans were confronted with a sobering reality. No matter how much they reinforced the plant, a small, determined, and well-trained team could strike again. The strategic implications were profound. Heavy water production was delayed indefinitely, research schedules disrupted, and German scientists forced to adapt under extreme pressure. The success of the second operation had wider effects. Allied intelligence gained confidence in combining local resistance knowledge with specialized training and meticulous planning. The Norwegian resistance, inspired by the repeated success, became more organized and effective. News of the operation, carefully managed and disseminated, provided a morale boost for occupied populations across Europe, proving that the Nazi war machine was not invulnerable. Chapter 7 highlights the follow-up phase of Operation Gunnerside, emphasizing adaptation, repeated precision strikes, and the strategic consequences of sustained sabotage. It demonstrates how continuous pressure, intelligence coordination, and expert execution could repeatedly thwart a powerful adversary, shaping the trajectory of the German nuclear program and reinforcing the principle that skill and courage often outweigh brute force in modern warfare. The repeated sabotage at Vemork sent shockwaves through the German scientific community. By 1943, the consequences of losing critical heavy water supplies became increasingly apparent. Research that had once promised a potential breakthrough in nuclear weapons development was now hindered by logistical impossibilities. Laboratories in Berlin and other occupied territories faced rationing, delays, and uncertainty as the production of deuterium oxide was halted for months at a time. Every setback forced scientists to rethink experiments and timelines, often working in secrecy while grappling with shortages of both materials and trust. Physicists who had previously relied on Vemork's steady output now faced a reality in which their most essential resource could vanish overnight. Uranium reactor experiments had to be recalibrated, research schedules were postponed, and the coordination of teams across multiple sites became more complex. The psychological strain was palpable. Engineers and scientists were under immense pressure to produce results, even as they were reminded that their facilities were vulnerable to Allied incursions. Some reports suggest that fear of sabotage began to influence experimental design, with personnel taking extraordinary precautions to secure samples and restrict knowledge to only those deemed essential. German military officials, meanwhile, were forced to allocate significant manpower to protect the remaining heavy water stockpiles. Guards were deployed, patrols increased, and every shipment was closely monitored. Resources that could have supported other operations, from frontline deployment to research in other weapons systems, were instead diverted to safeguard facilities and personnel. The Allies had achieved a strategic victory far beyond the immediate physical destruction. They forced Germany into a defensive posture, redirecting both attention and manpower to compensate for vulnerabilities exposed by the saboteurs. Despite these challenges, German scientists attempted to innovate under pressure. Small-scale heavy water production methods were tested in makeshift laboratories, and research teams experimented with alternative processes. Yet these efforts were slow, error-prone, and inefficient. The loss of Vemork meant that Germany could not produce the quantities needed to maintain a steady research program. Each month of delay provided the Allies with invaluable time to advance their own nuclear initiatives, particularly the Manhattan Project, where American and British teams accelerated development with knowledge that Germany's capacity was compromised. For the Norwegian resistance, the success of Operation Gunnerside became a symbol of how local knowledge and courage could influence global events. Communities previously hesitant to resist occupation now understood that small, focus groups could achieve results disproportionate to their numbers. The mountains, rivers, and forests of Telemark had become both battlegrounds and sanctuaries, their strategic value amplified by the ingenuity of human actors who understood how to navigate and exploit the terrain. The operation had not only delayed Germany's nuclear ambitions, but also strengthened local resistance networks, making future operations more feasible. Allied intelligence meticulously tracked the German response. Reports indicated the reallocation of scientific resources, the relocation of sensitive equipment, and the implementation of stricter security protocols. These developments confirmed that the saboteurs' actions had a lasting strategic effect. The Germans' attempt to maintain momentum despite repeated disruptions required constant adaptation, stretching their capabilities and exposing the fragility of their program. From London to Washington, Allied planners recognized that sustained pressure on Vemork could continue to influence the trajectory of the war. The human element of the German program also suffered. Morale among scientists and engineers was shaken. The sense that their work could be undone in a single night created anxiety, frustration, and suspicion. Collaborators who might have provided valuable assistance were closely monitored, reducing trust and increasing isolation within research teams. In contrast, the Norwegian operatives and resistance networks were buoyed by repeated success, reinforcing a culture of resilience, ingenuity, and audacity. The psychological dimension of warfare was evident. Small victories could tilt confidence, influence decision-making, and alter the operational calculus of both sides. Long-term consequences for the German nuclear program were severe. Without a reliable supply of heavy water, critical experiments stalled, timelines extended, and strategic plans were delayed indefinitely. The Nazis were unable to produce sufficient material to sustain a coherent atomic weapons effort before the Allied forces advanced into occupied territories. Operation Gunnerside, and its follow-up, effectively curtailed Germany's nuclear ambitions, demonstrating the extraordinary impact of targeted sabotage on a high-stakes scientific endeavor. The operation also highlighted the importance of coordination between intelligence, local resistance, and specialized operatives. British planners understood that the physical destruction of equipment was only part of the equation. Strategic impact depended on timing, secrecy, and local support. Norwegian operatives exemplified this principle, combining technical skill, courage, and intimate knowledge of the terrain to achieve a result that few conventional military units could replicate. Their actions served as a template for future Allied sabotage missions across Europe. Chapter 8 emphasizes the consequences of Vemork for German science, illustrating the interplay between sabotage, psychological pressure, and strategic delay. It shows that the physical destruction of equipment is only one aspect of warfare. The ability to disrupt, delay, and destabilize an opponent's plans can have far-reaching effects, shaping the broader course of conflict and demonstrating the profound impact of well-executed covert operations. By mid-1943, the Germans had taken every precaution they could imagine to protect Vemork, yet the Allies understood that repeated pressure was necessary to ensure the long-term disruption of the Nazi nuclear program. Intelligence indicated that despite fortifications and increased patrols, vulnerabilities remained. Logistical supply routes, mountain approaches, and the timing of guard rotations provided narrow windows of opportunity. The stage was set for a decisive, final series of strikes aimed at securing a strategic victory. The gunnerside operatives, seasoned by previous missions, returned to planning with meticulous care. Every route was mapped, every slope measured, and every patrol schedule analyzed. Local resistance networks provided vital support, offering food caches, winter clothing, and safe houses deep within the fjords. They understood the importance of timing. One misstep, one unexpected patrol, could mean capture or death. The mountains themselves, once again, became allies, treacherous terrain that challenged both the physical limits of the operatives and the German ability to pursue them effectively. The infiltration itself required extreme skill. Moving under the cover of darkness, the team navigated icy slopes and deep snow, climbing cliffs that few could survive. They used skis, ropes, and local knowledge to bypass guard posts and reach the plant's perimeter undetected. The combination of stealth, endurance, and tactical ingenuity demonstrated that a small team, moving with precision, could achieve effects that conventional military operations could not. Every step was measured, every pause deliberate, and every sound controlled, for even the faintest noise could alert the Germans to their presence. Inside the plant, the operatives faced the culmination of their previous intelligence gathering. Reinforced doors, newly installed security measures, and hidden observation points required rapid adaptation. The team split into coordinated units. One group placed explosives on the remaining heavy water equipment, while another ensured that all escape routes remained clear. Explosives were carefully calibrated, targeting critical components rather than non-essential infrastructure, maximizing disruption while minimizing collateral damage. Every action demonstrated a mastery of precision and planning that defined the gunnerside operation. The Germans, however, were not idle. Patrols intensified, searchlights scanned every slope, and alarm systems were tested repeatedly. The operatives' knowledge of timing and terrain allowed them to exploit gaps in these defenses, but the tension was palpable. One miscalculation could result in disaster. Snow and ice, while providing cover, also threatened every step with potential slips or avalanches. The operatives' physical and mental endurance was tested to the extreme, reinforcing the lesson that courage alone is insufficient. Skill, preparation, and adaptability are essential for survival in high-stakes operations. When the charges detonated, the effects were immediate and profound. The remaining heavy water production capacity was obliterated, and the Vemork plant's strategic value was effectively neutralized. German scientists were forced to confront the reality that their nuclear ambitions had been irrevocably delayed. Laboratories across occupied territories reported disruptions, recalibration of experiments, and the rationing of critical materials. The impact on the German atomic program was far-reaching, buying the Allies critical time to advance their own nuclear research. The retreat from Vemork tested the operatives' endurance to the limit. Evading intensified German patrols, they navigated mountains, rivers, and hidden valleys, often exposed to freezing temperatures and extreme fatigue. Local guides and resistance supporters played a crucial role, providing supplies, shelter, and intelligence about enemy movements. The combination of local knowledge and operative skill ensured that all members returned safely, a testament to the planning, resilience, and coordination that had defined the operation from its inception. The psychological impact on German personnel was profound. The repeated successes of a small, determined team undermined morale, instilled caution, and diverted resources. Officers and scientists recognized that no amount of fortification could entirely prevent infiltration. Fear, suspicion, and the necessity of constant vigilance became permanent features of operations around Vemork. In this sense, the Allies' strategic objectives were achieved not only through physical destruction but also through sustained psychological pressure. For the Norwegian resistance and Allied intelligence, the operation reinforced the principles of covert warfare. It demonstrated the value of local expertise, careful planning, and precise execution. The ability of a small group to inflict strategic disruption on a far larger and more powerful enemy highlighted the asymmetric nature of modern warfare, where intelligence, timing, and skill can outweigh sheer numbers. The lessons of gunnerside would influence subsequent operations across Europe, providing a blueprint for sabotage missions against critical infrastructure. Chapter 9 illustrates the final phase of the Vemork operations, emphasizing the effectiveness of repeated, precise strikes and the long-term consequences for German nuclear ambitions. It shows how courage, intelligence, and meticulous planning enabled a small team to alter the trajectory of a major scientific and military program, leaving a legacy of resilience, ingenuity, and strategic impact. Operation Gunnerside, culminating in the final strikes against Vemork, left an indelible mark on World War II and the development of nuclear science. The mission, executed by a handful of highly trained Norwegian operatives in cooperation with British intelligence, demonstrated the strategic power of precision, planning, and local knowledge. By halting heavy water production, the operation delayed the German nuclear program indefinitely, ensuring that Hitler's forces could not acquire the materials needed to develop an atomic weapon. The repercussions of this delay rippled far beyond Norway, influencing the broader course of the war. The Vemork sabotage highlighted the asymmetric potential of small units. A team of 6 men, operating in harsh winter conditions, with minimal equipment and relying heavily on intelligence and local support, succeeded where conventional forces might have failed. Mountains, snow, and frozen rivers became allies rather than obstacles, as the operatives exploited the terrain to evade German patrols and achieve strategic objectives. Their actions underscored a fundamental truth: courage and skill can outweigh numerical superiority, particularly when guided by meticulous planning and precise execution. The German response to the operation revealed the psychological and operational vulnerabilities of even the most powerful military programs. Reinforced security, additional patrols, and fortified infrastructure all failed to restore confidence. Morale among scientists and engineers was shaken, and resource allocation was redirected from other theaters to defend a vulnerable, isolated facility. The operation forced Germany into a reactive stance, consuming manpower, energy, and attention, while the Allies continued to gain time to advance their own nuclear initiatives, particularly the Manhattan Project. For the Norwegian resistance, Operation Gunnerside became a symbol of hope and effectiveness. Communities previously reluctant to resist occupation were emboldened, recognizing that coordinated action could yield disproportionate results. Resistance networks expanded, intelligence gathering became more systematic, and local populations actively participated in sabotage planning. The psychological and strategic effects of Gunnerside extended far beyond the immediate mission, shaping the operational philosophy of resistance groups throughout occupied Europe. The mission also influenced Allied strategy and intelligence operations. Planners in London and Washington studied the operation as a model for covert action. Careful reconnaissance, coordination with local populations, exploitation of terrain, and precision in execution were identified as essential elements for success. Subsequent sabotage missions in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands adopted similar principles, targeting rail lines, communication hubs, and industrial facilities. Operation Gunnerside demonstrated that strategic impact could be achieved not solely through large-scale combat but through targeted, high-risk operations conducted with intelligence and finesse. Scientifically, the operation had a profound effect on the German nuclear program. Heavy water was essential for experiments designed to produce fissile material. Its destruction at Vemork disrupted experiments, delayed reactor development, and limited the availability of key materials for further research. Without reliable access to heavy water, Germany's atomic ambitions were effectively curtailed. This delay was a critical factor in ensuring that the Allies maintained a lead in nuclear research, ultimately contributing to the success of the Manhattan Project and shaping the post-war balance of power in Europe. The legacy of Operation Gunnerside extends beyond the war. The mission serves as a case study in the power of intelligence, collaboration, and human ingenuity. It illustrates how a small group of committed individuals can influence global events, even against a technologically superior adversary. Military historians, strategists, and intelligence analysts continue to study the operation for its lessons on planning, execution, and the interplay between physical and psychological warfare. Its impact resonates in modern military doctrine, emphasizing the value of targeted, high-impact operations over sheer force. Human courage and local knowledge were central to this success. The operatives, facing extreme cold, treacherous terrain, and the constant threat of death, demonstrated extraordinary resilience. Their ability to coordinate with local guides, evade German patrols, and strike precisely at critical infrastructure exemplifies the synergy of skill, training, and determination. Each decision, each movement, and each calculation contributed to a strategic outcome far greater than the sum of its parts. Finally, Operation Gunnerside is remembered as a story of hope, ingenuity, and defiance. It embodies the principle that even in the darkest times, human creativity and courage can alter the course of history. By targeting the heart of Germany's nuclear ambitions, a small team of Norwegians not only changed the trajectory of the war, but also left a lasting impact on global science, strategy, and the understanding of asymmetric warfare. The echoes of their actions continue to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of calculated, courageous action in shaping the future. Chapter 10 concludes the story of Vemork, reflecting on its immediate and long-term impacts. It ties together the strategic, psychological, and scientific consequences, demonstrating how a precise operation in the Norwegian fjords influenced global events. Operation Gunnerside remains a defining example of how intelligence, local support, and human bravery can achieve outcomes of extraordinary significance, altering both the conduct of war and the course of history.